Let me just start out by acknowledging that I realize I have 3 strikes against me before I ever start talking. I'm not from higher education, and I split my time between California and Washington, D.C. What could I possibly have to say that would be of value? Well, I'll tell you what, I do spend a lot of time working with employers. So let me just, I'm not going to be presumptuous and tell you all how to do your jobs because, you know what you're doing. But let me just maybe point out a few things from the employer perspective that I think might be helpful as you go about doing this work and accomplishing this goal in the way that best fits your institution. So there are 3 really primary thoughts that I'd like to pass along. The first one is that I would just strongly encourage you to focus on the foundational at your institutional level. And what I mean by that is yesterday Burning Glass released a report on foundational skills. It's a great study that they did, and the name of it is The Human Factor, the Hard Time Employers Have Finding Soft Skills. And I'm sure we all hate the term soft skills, but they are foundational skills that are very important. And what Burning Glass looked at was the skills that employers are calling for in their job ads that they post. And 1 in 3 of the skills that they request in the jobs that they post are these foundational skills. And these are not just people skills. These are skills that really cut across many occupations. Writing, communication skills, and organizational skills are the most scarce. And why this is important is, if you think about an employer that's looking for a welder, they don't put something in their ad that says you need to be able to weld, because that's implied. But when an employer goes to the extent of mentioning a skill that's necessary for the job, it's important because it's probably not something they're seeing in most applicants, and it's also then an important part of the job. So that's why this report is important from Burning Glass. Again, it came out yesterday. I would encourage you to download it and take a look at it. But in my work, and I spent 2014 really spending my time with chief human resource officers of Fortune 500 companies, talking to them about the work that they do to get the qualified workers that they need to accomplish their jobs. And there was really an extensive list of these foundational skills that they talked about that they're having a hard time finding in their workers. We already mentioned communications. I was at the top of their list, but working as a team, critical thinking, and debating. Let me describe debating to you. It's not winning an argument in the business community. It's being able to go into a meeting, state your case, make the case for why the solutions that you're recommending, but then to be able to lose the discussion, but walk away knowing that the discussion was better because you participate in it and you made the points that you had to make. Also, listening, mentoring, leadership, self-direction, time management, project management, basic math, ethics, respect for diversity, human relations or customer service, as some employers call it, safety. Are you always going to do things precisely the right way, or are you going to cut corners when you think there's an easier way or no one's looking? Threat awareness. Do you know how to identify threats to you, your company, your customers, physical, customers or coworkers, physical, emotional, or financial well-being? Look at some of the hacking scandals that happened last year to realize how important that is. And also, do you have a sense of adventure? Do you want to see things outside your local community? Also, computer literacy. And so, as one chief human resource officer told me, technical skills are table stakes. It's these foundational skills that are really the differentiator and what can help your students get jobs. So if I were in your place, I think I really would focus on identifying an institution-wide, cross-cutting set of foundational skills with common definitions. What scares me from the outside as I think about what colleges might do to accomplish this is have each of their departments identify their own foundational skills, which then would have different terms, different definitions, and frankly would do more damage, I think, than good and cause confusion with the employer community. Frankly, I would buy or adopt a list. There are many lists that are out there of foundational skills, and I would just really encourage you not to try to find a perfect list. The whole point of the goal is that you identify what these skills are, and that you update the list. So no list is going to be perfect. Find the best you have, adopt it, and don't get hung up if the list isn't perfect. Just get going on the foundational skills and identifying those from the institutional level as quickly as you can, and really let the programs focus on the technical skills and the occupational skills. So what I'm trying to say here is, as an institutional level, I would recommend that you pick a list of foundational skills from which your departments then would work, and let them come up with their own occupational and technical skills. The second piece of advice I would give is act with urgency. I must admit, when I read the goals for the first time and saw by 2030, I was a little nervous. Then when I saw by 2020, I felt a little bit better. And I realize this is something that takes time, but I also hope you hear the messaging when you go to talk to your employers and say, well, great news. You know, I know you have a lot of open jobs right now, but by 2030, we're going to be able to really help you out. You know, just think about the way that you message that, because I get what you're trying to do, but you know, think of how your audience is going to hear that as well. And this is the other thing that goes on that I think is really important, and I learned this sadly through my own failures sometimes working in state and federal government. When any sort of government entity goes to business and asks them to partner on a project, and the business says yes, here's the disconnect. The government organization thinks of it like a marriage. They think, okay, the business is committed, they're in for good, we're set. The business thinks of it as agreeing to one blind date. Unless they see progress and unless they see results coming quickly and a meaningful outcome to their work, they're just going to fall away. They're not going to stay with it. So I really encourage you to act with a sense of urgency on this. And again, this is one of the reasons I am encouraging you not to get bogged down developing your own list of foundational skills, because I think it could just take too long. Another thing that's going on is employers really have reduced the number of colleges and universities that they work with. It used to be a large employer would work with maybe 30 colleges or universities to try to recruit the workers that they need. And since 2008, they've really cut that number back, many cases to a smaller number, around 5, where they can have more impact in what the school is doing to educate and train their graduates, and then the employer offers their internships only to those colleges that they're working with. So I do think if you act with urgency, this is an opportunity for you to go to employers that maybe you're not working with now and say, here is a new start, here's something we're doing, it's critical for us to be able to work together. The other reason I say act with urgency is unless this process is controlled, I really think it could just kind of spiral out of control. If you think of this from the employer viewpoint, you know, for example, how many colleges, universities, community colleges, private schools, trade schools are there in Dallas, for example? So how many of them are going to approach the same employers asking for help doing the same thing? You know, is each school going to be contacting the same employers? You know, what if each program within a school is contacting the same employers? So, you know, act with urgency, have some oversight on how this process is going to roll out at your college and university. I think you see where I'm going. You know, really just would encourage you to put together an aggressive plan, front load as much of your employer participation as you can. That's the other reason I'm encouraging you to work from an adopted list of foundational skills and not developing your own. Because if you think, okay, well, we're going to do some groundwork at our university, and then in 2019 we're really going to approach the employers and get more of their input. Really between 2017 and 2019, they may be approached by so many other colleges and universities or trade schools or even for-profit companies that are getting involved, like we discussed last night, that they're going to be disengaged from this process already. This is a process that really could meet to expand to meet the deadline, and I don't think any of us want this, because success is going to be all of us working together on an ongoing basis. Just act with as much urgency as you can around this. I also think there are really 5 critical headwinds that are facing education. That some of those have already been talked about. For example, debt. I don't want to go into that now, but that's another reason I think that really you should be looking at attacking this with a sense of urgency. And finally, my last request is follow this process where it takes you. Most of us, as we look at different initiatives and we step back and we're forced to look at what we do, why we do it, and ask really tough questions. If we will ask those tough questions and follow through on them, at the end of that process, I think we always end up with a better product. So as you go about this work, I think there are at least 7 areas where I think you're going to find yourself realizing there are some tough questions that need to be asked. And I would just strongly encourage those, and let me just list those 7 off really quickly here. The first, and I think frankly the most important, is how can we more closely integrate school and work? For the HR Policy Foundation, we did a study on the job listings that employers had. And what we found was 75% of the entry-level jobs that were posted required 3 years of experience. If your students are waiting until they get out of school to really develop work experience, it's too late. They're going to have a very difficult time getting in the job market. So I really encourage you to think through as you go through this process, how do you integrate school and work? And I realize professors don't have hours of their classroom that they can turn over to the business community, nor would I suggest that. But I do think there are smaller ways that you can help get the business community involved in what's going in the classroom. I mean, Skype is a fantastic tool. Is there a question of the week that colleges could use and bring in people from the outside who can talk about that question for a few minutes of a class time? Look for ways to integrate school and work. Secondly, I would say, how do we get more of the latest innovation and information into the classroom? There's so many great industry websites or conferences that are going on, but yet they seem separated from what's happening in the classroom. Look to see how many of these outside organizations that deal with the very latest industry information could somehow be integrated into the work that you're doing. Number 3, how do we really develop lifelong learning habits in students? The goal is you want students spending more time as students than they do as alumni. And is graduation really the ultimate goal of a university? I mean, you want to become the Marines. Once they're an Aggie or once they're a Red Raider or whatever they are, you want them to be that for life and to really want to be able to go back to the school and get the information that they need. What about a free continuing education class for everyone that graduates from your institution? I mean, I know that's not realistic everywhere, but what can you be doing to really instill in people a desire to be a lifelong student and not a graduate and then an alumni? Fourth, really, how do you shorten the distance between the classroom and the rest of the world? One of the employers that I work with, and this is very normal, they say that 50% of their manages someone who's located in a different country. So what can you be doing as you work through this process to really shorten the distance between what's happening in your university and the rest of the world? Number 5, how do you prepare students for the transition between employee and employer? One of the really critical changes happening in the workplace right now is the gig economy. And so you have so many people who are going through your programs now and will be in the future that ultimately they're really going to want to have their own business perhaps. So how do you help equip them not just to be an employee in the field that they're learning about, but to also have their own businesses and perhaps an employer in the field, without having to necessarily be a graduate from a business program? The 6th example I would give you is how do we instill in our students a desire to both be teacher and learner? There are 5 generations in the workforce, And what I hear talking to employers as baby boomers are thinking about retirement, companies sometimes struggle to keep them engaged and to keep their technical skills up. And they also struggle to help them bring along the younger generations in the workplace. At the same time, younger generations are not necessarily well equipped when they enter the workplace to be able to learn from people who have more experience. So how do you make sure that the people who graduate from your institutions learn to learn from others and also teach those who they have things to offer to? And then finally, my last point here, really, how do we implement this goal institution-wide? This isn't just a goal for your individual programs. What changes does this mean to your marketing program? How are they going to start marketing your programs better and really, when they go around and talk to potential students, really be able to articulate in a better way what this change means to your programs? And how are the career centers going to change so they can better help the students as they apply for jobs? So those are some of the thoughts that I had initially. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer questions later. Thanks.
Well, I really appreciate, Jamie, all of the comments that you made, and as I was listening to you, it occurred to me that, yes? Sure. Is this sound working, folks? Yeah. Okay, good. So I appreciated Jamie's remarks a great deal, and as I was listening to him, it occurred to me, inasmuch as collaboration is really key to addressing this opportunity around identifying marketable skills in all graduates, the soft skills that are required to succeed in the marketplace are the same skills that are required to have successful collaboration. And the one that stood out for me was when you mentioned listening. And something that faculty are not always good at is listening. And equally, you know, there are certainly many business executives who think they know the way the world works and they know how their business works, and they're not interested in listening to an academic's perspective on what sort of programs develop successful talent. So I think this notion of shared listening is really key to successful collaboration across these sectors. And so there's room for professional development, personal development on both sides of the conversation. The other thing that struck me was your reference to the gig economy. And it reminded me of an anecdote from Georgia Tech. And so back in 1940, Georgia Tech created a program called drown proofing. And so there was a faculty member at campus who had returned early from World War II, had seen soldiers under situations of great stress, and thought it would be important to teach Georgia Tech students how to survive under difficult circumstances. And so drown proofing involved binding students by the hands and feet and throwing them into a pool. And the objective was not for them to become Houdini and somehow wriggle out of the bindings, but instead to learn how to manage to float in the water for sustained periods of time in order to survive under difficult circumstances. And this ultimately became a graduation requirement at Georgia Tech for more than 40 years, and students called it Drowning 101. And a lot of students put off taking the course until their last semester because nobody likes being thrown into a body of water with their hands and feet bound. And ultimately, in the late 80s, they stopped delivering the course and making it a graduate requirement. But if you talk to the faculty and the leadership at Georgia Tech, they'll still refer to drown proofing. And nowadays, they refer to it as drown proofing 2.0. And as one senior administrator put it to me, the survival skill that students need today isn't, you know, floating in water under difficult conditions. It's having the capacity to create their own jobs. And so that's the survival skill that Georgia Tech is really trying to focus on as it thinks about preparing its graduates for the workforce. And so it's not just about work readiness, it's also about entrepreneurship. and it's also about being able to create jobs as well. But I think that this goal is absolutely laudable. I think that it's extremely well expressed in the strategy document. I think it is achievable. However, it's a journey of 1,000 miles, and it begins with a single step. So there's a great deal of work involved, and I think Jamie has given, a number of suggestions that are helpful for how to take action there. But I think ultimately the rationale for doing this is that we need students and faculty and other relevant campus services all thinking about the relation between study and work from day one when students get on campus. Now, it's very easy to say and not so easy to do because there are, as we discussed last night, lots of values in various constituencies who are going to have to be involved that may conflict with some of those efforts. And so I just wanted to start by highlighting a few of the challenges that I think you may encounter as you try to roll out various initiatives to achieve this goal. As we discussed last night, the disposition of certain faculty, perhaps it's a generational issue, perhaps it's a values issue, as I was suggesting, but in various ways you can have constituencies within your campuses who are going to resist this effort and this change. You may also have a lack of resources, especially as you go out and try to build corporate partnerships. And I think Jamie makes a really important point, which should be underscored. If you think of all of those schools in Dallas all trying to create relationships with the same leading employers in the marketplace, that's not good customer service either, right? So somehow the system needs to work at an institution level, at a system level, and at a state level so that you're managing those accounts, if you don't mind thinking of it that way, so that you're managing those relationships in an effective and thoughtful and aligned and coordinated way, and not simply everyone, like piranhas in a tank, going after the same targets. I also think that there are legitimate and important boundary issues that do have to be managed. Educators have to educate for life. We should have an orientation toward lifelong learning. We should anticipate that graduates will work in multiple industries, in multiple jobs, will progress, will take left turns and right turns. And as a consequence, if we cater too much to the desires of individual employers in the regions that we serve, we risk preparing our students for the jobs of the next year, the next 2 years, the next 3 years. But what about after that, right? So we have to think about these boundary issues, and universities and colleges have to take a longer view than employers who are looking for that talent today. There's also a great deal of complexity in integrating the various services that ultimately support work readiness. And that's by no means a small issue at all. And again, the cultural values of various stakeholders come into play there. But especially as we think about the relationship between the curricular and the co-curricular. Because at the end of the day, it's not enough simply to deliver both, either in sequence or in parallel. They need to inform one another. When students go off and work, they need to be thinking about how what they've learned in the classroom is or is not giving them the tools they need to succeed in the workplace. And then when they come back to the classroom, they need to share those lessons with their classmates. They need to share those lessons with their instructors. And there needs to be a continuous reflection. And so that needs to be very intentional. And some faculty are more than willing and ready to do that kind of integration, but others will think, well, it's not my responsibility. Training is someone else's problem. What I do here is educate. And so that's an issue that's going to have to be addressed. Another key issue is once you've created services, and even if you've managed to align them, you need to get students to utilize them. And if you just think about academic advising, if you had 100% utilization of your academic advising services, you'd have a heck of a bottleneck. You simply don't have enough capacity to serve all of your students. And so the expectation is that not everyone will take advantage of those services. If you think about career services offices as well, they typically have a handful of people in them. Could be 2, could be 4, could be 10, but it's not hundreds. and yet you may have thousands or tens of thousands of students. So you have to think carefully about utilization of services and creating capacity, and you need to make the investments in those services that you really do believe are critical. I also think that it's important for the state to take a role here in helping institutions make some fundamental decisions of the sort that Jamie was describing with the burning glass conversation, which is what are the high demand careers within the state? What are the needs to be prepared for careers in those fields? And how does curriculum map to those fields? There are a number of states that have initiatives that do that. Ohio has a website called ohiomeansjobs.com, which is intentionally to provide that kind of guidance to students, informed by the views of the labor market. So there's certainly a role here that the state can play in supporting institutions as well. And then I think it's also important that we recognize that, you know, if you just think about Texas and its scale and its diversity and the demography that's at play in the state, no two institutions are really alike or dealing with the same resources or the same challenges. So there's no one-size-fits-all approach to developing marketable skills. It needs to be local in context, both with respect to the audiences that you're educating, but also with respect to the industry that is a key contributor to the economics of a particular region. So there needs to be a great deal of tailoring to the local market. So having identified those challenges, I just wanted to throw a few ideas out there for opportunities. And some of this may be familiar to you. In other cases, it may be Greek to you if you haven't spent a lot of time in the classroom or talking to faculty and university administrators. But one of the movements in higher education right now that's garnering a lot of attention is the competency-based education movement. And there are a wide variety of ways of defining competency across various disciplines, across various job categories. But there are, as Jamie indicated, a number of models out there. One you may want to take a look at is the Lumina Foundation, which is based in Indianapolis and focuses its philanthropic efforts on education. The Lumina Foundation created something called the Degree Qualification Profile, which is a model for defining what is an associate degree, what is a bachelor's degree, what is a master's degree, and how are they different from one another, and what skills and capabilities should each develop. And out of that document, they're now working to develop a competency map. And then even beyond that, they're also trying to understand how these things lead to credentials and what sorts of credentials aggregate into certain bundles of competency. So there is already a great deal of work done, and Lumina is just one source, but it is a source that's getting a lot of attention from many, many colleges and universities across the country. And it is a collaborative effort between the foundation and university leaders themselves. So it's something that's being developed organically from within higher education. There are many models in the corporate market that are being brought into higher education as well, and those may be worth a look too. There's also, as you may see in the press these days, there's just a story in the Wall Street Journal earlier this week about Udacity, which is a online learning platform, was one of the MOOC providers, along with Coursera and edX, that raised so much money over the last several years. Udacity is now partnering with Google and others, AT&T among them, to deliver what it calls nano degrees, very short form credentials that are skills-based that help working professionals get from point A to point B in their careers. And that represents an opportunity for colleges and universities as well. Many, many opportunities around experiential learning. Talked a little bit last night about co-op and apprenticeship and internships and so on. A wide spectrum of things that you can do to create, again, what John Fry at Drexel calls those authentic connections to the workplace. That's what's really key, and I think Jamie emphasized that point as well. A great deal of opportunity around career services, as I mentioned, often an underfunded and under-resourced area of campus. At my university, it was in the basement of the library. I happened to run into the head of career services at my alma mater 2 days ago, And I was joking with her. I mean, I graduated from there in 1985. I said, don't tell me it's still in the basement of the library. She's like, we prefer to think of it as garden level. So I guess it's still there. If we're going to get serious about marketable skills, we have to get serious about career services. And that's going to require rethinking how we allocate resources. Alumni relations is also critical. Advancement is also critical. But we can't just think about alumni as sources of funding. We also have to think about them as educators, as recruiters, as people with ideas that can inform the shape of curriculum to help ensure that we produce marketable skills. And then I think the other key point, and again, Jamie referenced this, is how we manage either at the school level, at the university level, at the system level, at the state level, this corporate relationship development activity. We don't want everyone going after all of the same employers with different asks. We need to have some kind of coordination, and we need leadership at all levels in order to achieve that. So at the end of the day, I think that the key to creating collaboration around these issues is ultimately start small, pilot things, define outcomes you want to achieve, track your progress, assess your performance, and then when you achieve your goals, start scaling the initiative. But start small. Equally, focus on a small number of initiatives. I just read off a whole list of opportunities. You could attempt to do all of them. That would probably be a mistake because you're going to deploy your resources too thinly over too broad an area, and you're not going to see the results you want in any one of them. And so you can only have so many key strategic priorities. There may be many things that you can fix and tweak at the nuts and bolts level to create improvement, but at the strategic level, focus on a handful of key initiatives. Likewise, as you think about corporate relationship development, don't think about, well, we need to find, 1,000 employers in the region of all stripes, those that have 100,000 employees and those that have 10. That's not possible. Think about the top 20, the top 10, the top 5 that your institution needs to have deep relationships with. Figure out how to do that successfully, and then again, begin to scale that gradually to larger and larger numbers of organizations. So I think with some prudent and careful and intentional planning, you can demonstrate success and build on that success and start to achieve that goal, maybe even in time for 2030. Right? Thank you.
So we've got time for some questions, and so may I see Mary? We have the microphone, so let's ask a few.
I would just like to ask about the name of the article that you were mentioning for Jamie.
I'm sorry, the name of the article for? I think, Jamie, the Burning Glass
The Burning
report.
Glass report? Okay, sorry. Yes, it's called The Human Factor, the hard time employers have finding soft skills. And again, that's Burning Glass, and it was just released yesterday.
Could you list the 5 headwinds you referred to for those of us who don't know? The 5 headwinds facing higher ed.
I will. You sure you want to hear those?
I think I need to.
Okay. Let me, I don't want to ramble here. Let me go back to my notes. But, I think you talked last night, Peter, about what's going on in the private sector around education. And I think, this is not one of the 5 headwinds, but I think really what's going on in the private sector is they don't think of themselves as a knowledge monopoly, which I think still some schools think of themselves as. They think of themselves as the service industry. And, they really are identifying their customers and really trying to figure out what they can do to really drive performance around a specific target. And I think that's certainly one thing that's a real difference in kind of what's going on in the education ecosystem, if you will, overall. But the 5 headwinds that I referred to is outcomes measures. What I hear when I'm in Washington, D.C., they're not going to be asking for less performance information from colleges and universities. This is a trend that's just going to continue. The second one is generational student loan debt. I hear people from colleges and universities say, well, the average is only 25,000. Well, okay, so what happens if someone with the average of 25,000 marries someone with the average of 25,000? So suddenly you're taking into that family $50,000 in student debt. How are they going to be putting aside money for their children to attend colleges and universities? That's what really scares me to death about the student debt issue, is not just what people are paying now and what the average debt load is. It's the accumulation of that. And we have right now 4.8 million people who are in colleges who are parents and have children, adult learners with children right now, who can put nothing away for their children. I think also really the value of non-traditional certifications and degrees is gaining on the value placed on the traditional degrees. I think that's another issue that's out there. Pre-employment assessments, this is something we could spend all day talking about. I talk to some employers who swear by the results that they can get from a pre-employment assessment on whether or not someone who has the degree, they've accomplished everything they need to at a college or university, but yet they still don't have really the mentality or the specific traits that will make them successful in the job. And as employers realize the success that they have with these pre-employment assessments, that's something that could greatly affect colleges and universities, especially when coupled with the outcomes data that colleges and universities are needing to provide. I'll just give you one very quick example. I know an employer who swears that they've been able to eliminate unsafe behavior in the workplace through a pre-employment assessment. And again, that has nothing to do with the way that college and university is preparing someone, but yet it's almost a personality trait that's still very critical to the employer. And Peter just mentioned the last one is competency-based education and the changes that that's bringing to overall education and the education ecosystem.
All right. Jamie, Peter, thank you very much for helping clear up what is going to be one of our more challenging of the goals that we have for the strategic plan. And so it really is going to take, that's why I think you guys nailed it really well as far as how it's going to take a lot of collaboration, it's going to take a lot of thinking, and it's going to take a lot of us working together to make sure we're not stepping on each other's toes. So thank you very much for bringing that forward, and thank you for being here.